Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. We are on episode 26, and again, I'm very lucky to have a guest on for this episode. I have Christa, who is at Neurodivergent Rebel on Instagram. So Christa runs the sort of internationally recognised blog Neurodivergent Rebel. They also manage neurodivergent consulting, and just Christa has so much of an impact on social media. If you go and check out their Twitter, their Instagram, their blog, they're doing amazing things. So I'm gonna hand you over. I'm gonna just let Christa do an introduction.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, Emily. I've been a huge fan of your art for a while. I love how you convey things using pictures. It's just really beautiful and really great way to share your knowledge with the world. So I'm fangirling or fan-humaning. I don't know another way to say that that's not gendered. But
I like that.
fan-humaning. I don't know. I'm really happy to be here. I am a late diagnosed autistic adult. I didn't know I was autistic until I was 29. And when you find out you are autistic late in life, you're kind of turned loose on the world. There's not really a lot of next steps for you. It's just, congratulations, you have this new label and go figure it out. And so, part of figuring out, in this modern century is we go to Google. And I went in and started typing in autism and trying to find out about what being autistic meant to me. And pretty much everything that I found was very gloom and doom 4 years ago. And it was not conducive to what I myself really had experienced in life. The language was just so medical and cold, and it's really hard to see yourself in that as a person, because it's everything on there is very weaknesses based and only talks about the bad parts of autistic life. And there are a lot of good things, even though some things are difficult sometimes, and there are very real struggles. Some of us struggle more than others, but it's not fair to categorize a whole group of people only based on their weaknesses. And that really upset me. And that's kind of where I started my Neurodivergent Rebel blog, is to rebel against all of that stigma and misinformation that was out there, because it was just a really dark place to be newly discovered and see all of that.
Mm-hmm. And I totally get what you're saying about after diagnosis, going to the internet, and so much of it is kind of children based, or kind of young sort of toddlers, it's all kind of based around that, or parenting, within autism and stuff like that. Whereas actually we're turning to Google with a totally different kind of want and need, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's okay, where do we go as adults? And, I had already, when I was first discovered, I was diagnosed. I like to say discovered better, because diagnosis is kind of, although we should all have the basic right to be diagnosed, the services are not available everywhere. And some people are on these long wait lists, or just can't afford diagnosis because of insurance or whatever reason, depending on the part of the world you live in. I'm trying to change to say I was discovered just before my 30th birthday. And so, when that happened, I was lucky that the person who gave me the information recommended I read a few books that were written by autistic authors and read autistic voices. And so that was what my first taste was. And I was like, oh, I really relate to this. This is me. I get it. But then, after that is when I went to the internet and was like, but what is all of this? And I had already been pushed down, that path towards, this isn't something wrong with me. And the diagnostician said that, this is nothing wrong with you. You just have a different operating system, kind of is what it was explained to me as. And so I was pushed in that direction. But that's this crucial turning point that I find, whether you're a parent with a child who's just been diagnosed, or you are an autistic adult yourself and you are just discovering that you are autistic or neurodivergent. You can either go down one of two roads, where it is that gloom and doom road, where this is something that is inherently flawed in me and it will hold me back for the rest of my life, and I'll never be able to do anything. This I'll never mindset, where the medical pathology really pushes that way. Or the direction I was bumped when I was discovered, that yes, you have different skills, different weaknesses, and it's different, but that doesn't necessarily make you a broken person or wrong. And so
Mhm.
I'm lucky I was pushed in the right direction, but it's a crossroads that I think every autistic person will find themselves at one point in their lives. And I'd love to nudge more people down the right path, because the other direction is not good for your self-esteem or your mental health.
Definitely. And I think, like you say, like just to have someone who pushed you in the right direction, and also to have like an assessor who was actually kind of positive about giving you the kind of, sort of diagnosis or label, or, discovering that you're autistic. Like I was diagnosed at age 25, and I had such a lovely assessor. She said to me, "Congratulations, Emily, you have autism." And that's the best way to tell someone they're autistic. Like, we shouldn't be kind of, I don't know, it shouldn't be coming across in a negative way. It's, it gives us this clarity. And now that we've discovered, we're not, we're just slightly different. So I think I definitely resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's something too. When people I ever say on Twitter or on social media, I see someone say, "I just discovered I was autistic." I always make a point to say, "Congratulations, welcome home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's the
welcome
start
to
of
the
a new
club.
journey." Yeah,
Yeah.
welcome home. Congratulations. Because I don't know if she said congratulations to me when she diagnosed me, but it was a similar kind of a feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful, so grateful for that. It's like to pass that along as much as possible.
That's great. I'm glad, like, it's so nice to hear someone who's had like a positive experience. And, like, did you have to sort of wait long for a diagnosis when you kind of sort of decided that you might want to go forward for one? I don't really know what process you sort of went through, if that makes sense.
So I'd say I was pretty lucky in that I had insurance at the time, and so I did get referred after, I think, maybe about a year and a half, dealing with some other health problems that we had been trying to sort out with my general practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, after different diets, different supplements, different things, they kept trying to figure out what was going wrong with me. The doctor said, "I think you might have anxiety," and referred me to someone for my mental health. And since I had also recently discovered a book that was written by an autistic person, and they had just described their autistic experience, I'm thinking, well, that's very similar to my own experience. That's interesting. I asked if I could see someone that also knew something about autism, if I was going to go ahead and go down the mental health field anyway. And
Mm-hmm.
ironically, the doctor said, "I don't think you're autistic," but gave me a referral card to the National Autism Society, and then I went down that route to find someone who had experience with adults. And it wasn't too long of a process from when I had the idea that maybe this might be something. I had kind of thought maybe it could be something for a while, but I wasn't really looking to pursue it. But once I got to the point where like, "Oh, you're going to go start seeing someone for mental health," I was like, "Well, let's just ask it all at once, get it all over with."
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I'm glad it wasn't sort of a very like drawn out process, and that it kind of, you obviously followed a sort of journey along, of trying to kind of work out, where your anxiety was coming from, and then moving on to kind of maybe an autism diagnosis. So, I mean, it's good that someone maybe suggested that initially, like a doctor, I guess, but that's good. I hear a lot of people who have like really long waiting times and stuff. But I appreciate you're in America and you're paying for insurance. So, you obviously have the right to these referrals and everything.
Yeah, to utilize it, it's not really an option not to have that kind of thing over here, unfortunately. But neither system is perfect, really, is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. It's really interesting to just like compare. Like usually when I get like a guest on, I always try and like compare our diagnoses and stuff. And it's so nice to speak to someone who's kind of been in a similar situation to me and has been diagnosed like late in life. And I think, I mean, it sounds like you're definitely embracing it. And I think we both are, like on Instagram as well, and just trying to spread a bit of awareness, but also positivity around the subject.
Yeah, and really to humanize it, because what we have right now is a lot of medicalization, and it that really removes the human aspect of it, and lets people try to separate autism from the individual. And I don't think, and many autistic people would agree, that that's not something that can really be done without changing the very foundational nature of how a human experiences and interacts with the world and other people.
And like you say, it's so like everything you look online is very like medical and like study based, and it's not really for us. It's not really meant for us to read and stuff, and it's really hard to interpret and process what these people are saying, even if they are extremely clever. But yeah, I think it's all about humanizing it and making it less of a like taboo topic to talk about, I think.
Yeah, and letting autistic people have a bit of the narrative as well, because for a lot of years we have had people who aren't necessarily autistic controlling and dominating the narrative about autism and what autism is, and completely speaking over autistic people who are trying to share their own experience, and sometimes even dismissing or discounting these autistic experiences of the world. And so it's time for us to see and highlight and hear those voices. And it really actually makes me excited the more and more autistic people out there making podcasts and creating art and videos or whatever it is, sharing what they do and who they are with the world, the better, because it's important that, it's not just me or you. There's autistic people all over the world, and we're all very different people. We're all different individuals, different genders, different races, different abilities, levels, and things like that. We all need. We're all just individuals, and even autistic person to autistic person. So I think it's important that more of us do come and start to talk about these issues, so we can see more of the diversity in autistic people. Because now I think society has this picture that autistic people are all children, or we're all guys, or white, or all of these other things, and the information and the diversity isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We're so much more than that. And, like you say, it's across different sort of genders and cultures and races and stuff. And, like a platform like Instagram is really like, I found like the autism community to be like wonderful on there. You have people from all walks of life telling their sort of story. And it's important to be able to, if you're sort of newly diagnosed, just to be able to, I don't know, relate to someone out there, or just, I don't know, that's what, when I started my Instagram, was I was just looking for people to follow who are in the same situation as me, who are showing their daily life as it is, not through a filter, or that it's amazing all the time, because life isn't amazing all the time. And just to be able to see someone like, I don't know, struggling with something sensory wise that you are, and it's just like refreshing. I don't know if you feel that as well.
Oh yeah, because it's learning you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting also too, because before I knew I was autistic, I didn't even really understand sensory processing differences, or that I had them.
Mm-hmm.
I went 29 years of my life until I was diagnosed autistic, having these migraines from fluorescent lighting, where within 4 or 5 hours of being exposed to an office or a building or a store with fluorescent lighting, if I spent too much time in it, I would have a complete migraine and be physically sick from it. And I was working in an office where I had to go, and every day I went to the office, I had a migraine. And this started when I was in elementary school in the first grade. And I was going to the nurse every day saying I had a headache. And the nurse was just convinced I was trying to get out of school, and told my mom that, Christa doesn't like school. Christa doesn't have a fever. We have to keep Christa in class. There's nothing wrong with Christa. And so, not pushing further in this, that I was told I needed to just go to class and stop talking about having a headache. But I never stopped having headaches. I was just told to stop complaining about it. And I didn't realize that not everyone had sensory processing differences or got headaches from lighting. And then for 30 years, I went on not knowing why I was having those headaches until I was diagnosed autistic. And it was like, oh, sensory processing. I stumbled down that wormhole and learned about, how all of that sensory overload, and stopped exposing myself to fluorescent lighting. And I haven't had a migraine in a very long time, maybe over a year now. And, I just don't expose myself to that trigger anymore. But, even in an office setting in the past, I've tried to, with previous employers, request accommodation to either not sit where those lightings are and have natural light, or work remotely. And I've been told by employers that that's unreasonable because nobody likes those lights and everyone would like to sit in a quiet corner with natural lighting. And it's like, well, isn't that kind of the point?
Yeah.
Right? We're just the canaries in the coal mines, I think, as autistic people. We're more sensitive to these things, but it does bother other people, not just autistics.
Exactly. And us having to drag ourselves into open plan offices and just sitting there and bearing this, you don't realize that, okay, not everyone loves, open plan offices, but to the degree that we're having to deal with it, where it is, it really takes a toll on, like you say, your health, having migraines and stuff like that, which can be really debilitating. And just, I don't know why they don't understand that, reasonable adjustments would actually, improve our work.
Yeah. And so when I've been working in the business sphere for a few years now, and because I have a background in recruiting and management and different, actually, from retail to food and corporate and all of those things. So, I've been very lucky in that regards. And so I've noticed a lot of, these similar issues too in the workplace. And we've got a lot of work to do in general. We've got a lot of work to do.
Exactly. I don't know, employers just aren't that clued up about that sort of thing, and don't, they think of their workforce as a whole and not, as individuals. And, we all work very differently, whether we're neurodiverse or not. So I do wish there was some more understanding.
And, I even disclose up front in my interviews now, because I say, oh, well, this is what I need in order to be my best self at work, or in order to do my job effectively. This is what I need so that I can help you, help me help you, kind of a thing. Because the neurotypical job business society is like, what's in it for me? And, it really is worthwhile for the employers to make these adjustments. But what I'm working with employers in general is to help them standardize their policies so that these things are innately built into the organizational ecosystem, so that people don't even need to request formal accommodations through a medical process. It should be set up so that if an employee comes to the employer and they need something to do their job better, whether or not they have some medical diagnosis that says they must have this thing, if it's possible and it's not going to really harm the business to do it, why not just trust your employee and let them do a good job? Because, if you already have a culture in your workplace where you can't trust your employees and you're like, well, how will I trust them? They don't really need this. They're making it up. That's another organizational problem, like a cultural problem, that the organization doesn't trust its employees. And so that's a whole other issue there too. That's not good for, emotional safety in the workplace, is if you feel like you can't trust the people you work with.
I'm sort of in that position, in that my employers don't know that I'm autistic. I am usually in an open plan office, and I do think I'd love to be able to go to my employer and just say, look, I can work so much better if we do this, this, and this. And like you say, having a standard process where we don't have to go through, multiple sets of forms, or giving evidence as to why, some of these things are so simple, like you say, not being placed under really bright lighting or near, I don't know, a noisier section of the office, or, a pathway through the office or something like that. I'd love to be able to be that open, but I think I'm in the situation that you were sort of talking about, where you want to be able to talk to your employer, but you don't trust them so much, and I also don't trust people not to share my private diagnosis. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I would love to be able to tell them, and I think like what you're saying and what you're working on is really important. So
Yeah.
I hope it goes more that way.
And you shouldn't have to tell them. And it shouldn't be a big deal if you do tell them. Disclosing shouldn't be a big deal in the workplace, but it is, because people have faced very real discrimination in the workplace already, which is unfortunate. But, in like I'm saying, the ideal system where disclosure wouldn't even be necessary, it would be like recognizing that open office plans don't work for a lot of people. It's not just autistic people. It's not even just neurodivergent people, but autistic people. People who identify as having ADHD also struggle with open offices a lot of the times. People who are introverted would also say they rather not work in the open office sometimes. And also, people who normally can excel working in an open office day to day might situationally need to work somewhere quiet because maybe they have a deadline, or they're trying to learn something new, or they have to do something very detailed where they have to really focus. And so situationally, people can need to move into an area where they need quiet and focus. So if you set up the office where, okay, yeah, there's still this communal area where people can work together in groups, but there's also this quiet area where anyone who needs to work somewhere quiet can work. It can be set up to where it doesn't have to be this whole medical process, and it'll make the workplace better for everyone, autistic, neurodivergent, neurotypical. And that's, what true neurodiversity is. It's not just neurodivergent people, and it's not neurodivergent people over here and neurotypical people over here. That's segregation. It's inclusion with the two groups. So, all of it should be included. There shouldn't be like this separate route in employment or route for candidates coming in who are autistic. The systems need to be redesigned so that we can include the groups together naturally, and it doesn't have to be medicalized. And we're a long way from this. But some organizations are doing it successfully now. I have seen it.
Yeah.
And we're getting closer. We're getting closer.
It's annoying because the way you put it so simply, we're really not asking for the world. We're asking for a quiet space. We're not asking for money to be thrown at something or to have our own offices, even though that would be ideal.
Oh yeah.
But we're literally asking for a quiet space to work in. I don't feel like that is a huge push for especially if you're working for a larger company. It should be something that can be provided. It's not a big ask.
And for those of us like me who do better working completely remotely at home, because I can drive. I can't say that I drive well, and driving is very taxing for me. It takes me a lot of energy, especially if I drive somewhere new or in traffic. I try not to drive when I don't have to. And if I'm going to be driving to and from work, that takes a lot more mental energy for me than it would someone who is not autistic, or an autistic person who doesn't struggle with driving. Because I know some autistic people who are great drivers. They could probably, we even have autistic NASCAR drivers. So it's not that all autistic people can't drive, but a lot of us struggle with it. And so even letting people work remotely and not physically having to commute in, instead of saying, at one job, they kept asking me to come in physically more and more, even after my diagnosis, when I had originally been hired to mostly be remote. And then at my new job, when they had never had a remote employee before, instead of saying, that's not the way we do things here, they asked, okay, well, we've never done that before. How does this work? And asked me how I could work as a remote employee instead of just shutting it down. And that's the other thing, we need employers to be willing to do, is have flexibility and be willing to challenge their existing systems that they may have had in place for years and years, to say, okay, this is how we've always done things, but we need to be open to changing these systems and making them better. It's ridiculous to think you could have a system for a lot of years and have it never change. It's like with computer software, there's always these new revisions because they're always improving and making these better. There's always a new iPhone because it's always getting better. How come our employment systems and our education systems don't do that too? Because same thing with education. It's the same system set up to teach one type of learner and teach people to go work factory style jobs, like it's very out of date. It's not catching up with the world and our knowledge of how people's brains work and how people learn and think. It's ridiculous that we're so behind with these kinds of things.
It really is. When you put it like that, it's things like education and like policies within like employment and stuff like that. It's so kind of rigid and static, and it's just not meant for everyone. Like you say, like the way we're taught and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of just trying to teach the masses, isn't it? Rather than the individual. So yeah, it's really good the way you put that. Like you say, like technology, software, it's always being updated. There's always so many iterations of things, but yeah, we're kind of stuck in the kind of old ages with employment stuff, which is crazy.
Yeah. We've, like I said, I feel like it's starting to have an uptick in the last 5 years, maybe, especially 2020. I don't know what it is about this year. It's a weird year. A lot of really bad, scary things are happening, but I am trying to focus on the bright side. So, one bright side is for those of us that do work better remotely, and myself included, even because I used to hop on planes and go do talks. And I had a tour this year where there's a flight booked every month, March through November. And I was thinking, this is going to be great, but I don't know how I'll survive it because it taxes me so much to do that. Even though I love especially going to conferences where there are other autistic people and getting to be in a group of autistic people, there's nothing like it. It's so amazing. And unfortunately, a lot of autistic people never get to experience that because, we don't get to meet others like us. But now that everything changed and people are now meeting over Zoom and more workplaces are going remote, I've shifted all of my trainings to Zoom as well. And I can probably do a lot more trainings now than I would have been able to do if I was traveling around the world because I need a lot more recovery time in between. And, employers even who were hesitant to ever let their employees work remote, like we had here, local city, county government, that were very anti-work remote because they're like, everyone's going to goof off. And how do we know people are going to work? Within, I think it was like 2, maybe 3 weeks in, the leaders in the county government had already noticed and couldn't deny that their employees were more productive working at home than they were in the office. And so, our county government here locally, one of them has decided to keep most of their workforce remote indefinitely. And, we saw this with companies like Google and other large companies that, they don't know how long they're staying remote, but they're going to keep a large percentage of their workforce remote. And so we have less hesitation to that. And so that, that opens doors for people with neurodivergence and different kinds of disabilities. So there's like a little piece of good in all of that. And so hopefully also, people have learned to be a bit more compassionate with each other. We have families who are at home with kids that are doing homeschooling, and kids are popping in on people's Zoom meetings, and people who hadn't worked remote before are getting used to, the interruptions that come from working with your family around or your pets around popping their dog heads into your meeting. And so things have gotten a lot more human in the workplace, I think, this year. And that's hopefully a good thing if continuing forward, once we're past this pandemic, people continue to remember those lessons, and then we saw people accommodating people who didn't have disabilities, and it was people accommodating parents who have to work around their kids and things like that. And it's a lot, of things have changed.
Yeah, I agree. And like you say, we've had this opportunity this year, and I know it's a bit weird to say we've had an opportunity during a pandemic, but a lot of people had the opportunity to try remote working, and for a lot of people, including myself, it's a much better setup. It's much less stressful. It's much less taxing in terms of like commuting and the kind of mental kind of just processing all these things and not getting home and having a sort of meltdown and stuff like that because you're in your own environment and stuff like that. So I appreciate that this year has given me that opportunity, even though it's been the weirdest and kind of the worst year. And like you say, the big companies like, Google, Microsoft, that sort of thing are appreciating that actually people can work from home. People can be trusted to do their work from home. And I think initially that was a bit of a worry. And then everyone kind of was doing it and was doing their work. We can be trusted. So you mentioned a little bit about your sort of like teaching and your talks and stuff like that. Are they like, so I was going to ask you like what sort of like services you sort of offer as part of like your kind of consultancy sort of work?
Yeah. So I think my passion is in that workplace and business sphere, trying to help organizations make change. But also, I love designing and delivering neurodiversity and autism related trainings. And yeah, I will eventually probably go back to doing them in person someday. But for the foreseeable future, I'm doing all of those trainings and meeting with organizations over Zoom. And so, in addition to like some of those trainings, things that can happen working with organizations would be maybe looking over policies and helping them to determine things that are maybe unintentionally discriminating or harming neurodivergent people. I've also worked within organizations to help, if we have an employee, sometimes, you think you're going to go in to do that and you think you're going to do coaching with an employee, but you're actually also coaching the leaders in the organization and the managers, because once you get into a neurodivergent employee who's struggling in the workplace, yes, you're trying to help them get their goals, but a lot of times you see that there's probably another reason that they're struggling. Mm-hmm. Maybe something has been stacked against them unintentionally. The way the training could have been delivered may not have been very accessible, or something like that will fall through the cracks. And as you start to talk to the employee and the managers and the leadership, you start to learn that maybe there are some systematic problems in the organization. And so the coaching can kind of lead to changes that way too, working within an organization. And so that's something I've been doing a bit of even before when I started on my own doing these things. I was doing them inside the company I used to work for before branching off to continue doing the services, as an independent contractor. And I'm doing a few individual coaching sessions outside, life coaching and career coaching outside of working with organizations as well, one-to-one. But I do have, it's a limited amount of people I can fit into those slots. Like my openings are starting in November this year for those, because I do want to focus a lot on writing and creating educational content. I think teaching is really my passion, and writing is something that has always, I think, brought me the most peace. I feel like I express myself so much better in writing, having that time to think and organize and really clearly get a thought out versus trying to speak it without practicing as much.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, it sounds like you're doing so much. You're only one person, and you're kind of, I can see that you're like really passionate about like teaching and educating others, and it's great that you've adapted to the whole kind of situation and the pandemic and stuff, and been able to provide your services online. I think that's huge, because like you say, you were so used to sort of giving talks in person, and there's pros and cons of that, obviously, like you say, like with the travel and not kind of reaching that burnout. You don't want to like tire yourself out like so much. So it's great that you're offering those services online. And like you say, I think a lot of people are getting used to these like Zoom calls and things, and just appreciate being able to chat to someone like kind of more personally on like a personal note and like one-to-one stuff. So that's great. So I was going to ask you kind of, so did you say that you had your like diagnosis 4 years ago? Was that right? Or was that when you started the whole kind of blog and everything?
So the diagnosis was a little over 4 years ago. It was in the fall.
Okay.
I think it was in September. And I started the blog probably, I think I registered it, but didn't actually post or do anything with it really soon after I was diagnosed. But I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to say yet. And I know
Mhm.
within a month I had officially like started it. And I thought I would write and do topics that would be relevant to neurodivergent people, especially, but also relevant to neurotypicals, because I wanted to really show that these things are relevant to everyone.
Mhm.
And I wasn't originally even thinking I was necessarily going to talk specifically about autism. But then once I got into Twitter and kind of started to really see the depths of the amount of misinformation that was out there, I realized pretty quickly that I was going to need to talk more about
Mhm.
autism, because there was just so many myths and so much misinformation out there, and just it irked me that it was so wrong.
I know what you mean. It can be very hard, even just online looking at the news, whether stuff is true or false or not. So the sheer amount of volume of information on autism online, it can be very difficult to know what is real. And we can be quite vulnerable as autistic people. I know I am, and I can be influenced very easily. So like you say, it can be quite harmful to us and our mental health if we're not careful and we're not we don't protect ourselves online.
Yeah, and online's kind of a really scary place. It's hard to know people's intentions through the internet, right?
Mhm.
People, even before, I think my mother put the fear of the internet into me when I was little, because you would hear stories about people meeting someone on the internet and something bad happening to them when they met up because the person on the internet was lying about who they were and all of that. And so, I came onto the internet kind of really afraid and almost thinking before I put my face on my blog that it would be an anonymous blog, because I was so concerned about the dangers of the internet. But
Mhm.
I'm glad I didn't do it that way. But it's hard, even not online, to judge and gauge people's intentions. And for me, it's like takes me a while to really sit back and observe and watch someone new to figure them out, to even see if maybe their words are lining up with their actions or not. But it's like
Mhm.
my gut instinct is, well, why would they lie? It doesn't even occur to me like that someone would be lying. And unfortunately, you've sometimes through trial and error, you've encountered, like I know I've encountered bad situations multiple
Mhm.
times and learned through failures that people don't always have the best intentions. And that really is not great, because you have to kind of be on alert and be very guarded. Um, and that goes for online and in person, really, but especially with the internet, where you don't
Mhm.
necessarily know who's on the other end of the keyboard.
Exactly. And that is the kind of scary thing about it. But it's important to, I think, raise this awareness. And I wouldn't want to not be on the internet, I think, because I have found, my like people I call friends now, people through
Mm-hmm.
the autistic community that I would never have been able to reach, because they're all based across the world. So there's definitely the pros and cons to it all, isn't there? But I wanted to ask you specifically because you've kind of changed the whole kind of, for me, Twitter into a more kind of positive sort of light, to do with your hashtag asking autistics sort of like thing that you do. So like where you ask like a short question about like autistic experiences, and then like everyone sort of like all like chimes in. I really love that.
Oh, I'm so glad that one actually means a whole lot to me, because one of the first things I noticed when I joined Twitter, and I got bigger on Twitter before anywhere else, before my blog took off, before anything, I was just this person on Twitter, which is just random. But I noticed that in the actually autistic tag, we had a problem, and this is still a problem, but maybe it was worse back then because there was no alternative, where parents of autistic kids who often were really well-meaning and were just looking for help potentially and autistic perspectives on things would use actually autistic to try and ask actually autistic people questions about autism, and then get jumped on or attacked by people saying this tag is only for autistic people, which is a valid concern because autistic people online, like we were saying earlier, for years have felt spoken over by non-autistic people and parents, and they didn't feel as if they had their own space, or that it was their own space, but it was being invaded by people who were not autistic. This is supposed to be our space. But part of the reason I do all of this is because I want to correct the misinformation. And if we shut out the people we need to share information with, we'll never be able to correct their misinformation, because the minute they stepped in asking questions, we kicked them out of the community. And we need those allies. And so that's why the Asking Autistics tag was created, so that anyone who had a question about autism, be it an autistic person or a non-autistic person, could use that tag to ask their question about the autistic experience, and would get answers from people who were autistic people or actually autistic. And it took off. And I'm so glad it took off, because I think that probably took away some of that struggle and negativity that we were having on Twitter, because we shouldn't be, there's in this parents versus autistic people thing that kind of happens sometimes in our community. And some parents, they get led in that bad direction. But a lot of parents, especially the ones that really want to hear from us and want to come and get information from autistic adults and from the autistic community, we don't want those people to go that other route. We want them to find us. They're looking for us. We want to welcome them in so that they can learn how to become our allies, because they probably don't know. They're starting off how to be a good ally to an autistic person. And that's in fact why they're coming, to find out how to be better allies for their kids a lot of times, or their loved ones.
And I think that's so important that, like you say, we don't sort of shut these people out, because part of our sort of role, I feel, is to educate these people and always kind of be open to answering questions. Like, I'm always happy for someone to direct message me a question. I'm never going to judge someone for asking me something. And the whole kind of idea of the hashtag Asking Autistics is it's that kind of safe place where I don't feel like we're judging people. We are just kind of, appreciating what people have to say and being open to, just talking more about it. I think we shouldn't be shutting these people out. And I sort of get DMs on my Instagram from like parents, and I never set out to be something that, parents looked at. I was kind of coming from the whole adult side of things, but parents are saying like, oh, your drawings, help me appreciate what like my 3 or 4 or 5-year-old is going through, because they're not talking yet. And it's like things like that where I'm like, oh, actually something I'm doing is targeting people I didn't even, wasn't even hoping to reach. So I don't know, it's definitely important to be open to chatting. And I think your hashtag is, one of the ways that, neurodiverse people can chat with each other, but also, people get this kind of collective understanding of what autism, can involve or what it might be.
Well, it's back to that true neurodiversity. It includes the neurotypicals and the autistic people, and all of us together, not separate, not segregation. It's inclusion. So it's just one more way we're trying to really make inclusion. And that's what I'm looking for and asking for, because even, in the workplace and in school right now, we still have a lot of segregation. And this is, these are things for autistic people and these are for non-autistic people. And it's like, it's like we should all all be together. We're all people, whether or not, whatever our neurotype is.
Yeah, we're all humans.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of kind of everything you do sort of work-wise, do you have any kind of, I know probably autism is like a special interest for you in terms of sort of, your work and researching and consulting, but do you have any kind of sort of other things you do to relax, or you are someone who has to kind of schedule in that time, if that makes sense?
I definitely have to schedule in that time. No, that makes total sense. So, I am heavily dependent on a visual schedule, like it's like all of the tasks and everything I'm working on is super structured out. And if I had to make a rule even that I don't work after a certain time of day every day, and I don't, like, my laptop is closed and put away on weekends, because otherwise I would work 24/7. And the like autism, you said that's definitely my top interest since being diagnosed. But ironically, or maybe not so ironically, since I was a very young person, like, psychology and behavior from animals and people has been kind of one of my oldest interests in general, other than reading, which was my first interest. But, when I was really little, I wanted to understand animals, like Dr. Dolittle. Like, I wanted to know what they were thinking. I wanted to know what they were saying. I wanted to know how they were feeling. I wanted them to trust me and communicate with me. And so, like, animal behavior was my first special interest. And that evolved when I started to become a preteen, because then humans were confusing. Go figure, undiagnosed autistic signs, right? People were confusing. Yeah. So then I kind of wanted to study more about psychology and human behavior, because people were such a mystery to me. I wanted to study them under a magnifying glass. And so now, like, learning I'm autistic and autism and neurodiversity is just another, like, piece to where this really narrow topic of interest, which was like dogs and then animals. But first with, like, dogs, it was dogs and then all animals, where it's like I knew every single dog breed and it was all I talked about was dogs, has now grown to include humans and psychology and now autism and neurodiversity. So it's like this little area has been just growing to be a bigger interest in my life. And I've had other ones, but it's just important to think, if you have an autistic kid who's very young and they maybe have a very narrow interest in something that feels really random to the parent, like they're just interested in this one little thing, it could very well in 30 years or more become a much broader interest or evolve, because the special interests kind of evolve over the years and change and shapeshift.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting to hear that you like kind of rely on the sort of visual schedule to like keep you going. And I know what you mean in terms of like just blocking out your time and seeing that visually like represented is just a much clearer way to work and to understand, what's your free time, what's your work time. And I get what you mean where your special interest kind of overlaps your work, because so does mine. I'm a graphic designer, but actually, in my downtime, I'm still interested in graphic design. So it's something that doesn't go away. And like you say, it's only going to grow over the years and, just go into different avenues and things like that where I'll want to research different things. So I definitely get what you mean about your special interest also being just part of you and part of your work anyway.
Yeah. And it's like, it's a very big part of who I am, I think a lot of people with our interests, I at least feel, and I've heard other autistic people say similarly, it's like you find a new interest and it's almost like falling in love, right? This thing becomes this all consuming thing in your life, and it's pathologized often that we have these obsessive interests, but like being in love, they bring me and a lot of us extreme joy and comfort to have these interests.
Definitely. It's something to not fall back on, but just have as a constant in your life, no matter how you're feeling or where you are or, what your mental health is like. Just having something to, I don't know, keep you busy, not necessarily fixate on, because that, that can be a bad thing, but just having something to enjoy every day and just be a part of, I think, is really important, especially if you're autistic. So I do understand that.
Oh, yeah. And helping us to prevent burnout too.
Mm-hmm.
Some interests might be exhausting and taxing, but having some interests that when we engage in them, it helps us kind of recenter and relax ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Finding out what those are, because those things often recharge us and bring us joy. And so when we're doing things that are hard for us, it's like we need to make time to do those things that regenerate us and make our lives happier. And having those passions can really be helpful.
I think so, definitely. And just like you say, it's something helpful to have, and it's like, an old friend kind of thing. Like for me,
Mm-hmm.
especially, just reading up on something I'm passionate about is just like, I don't know, it's relaxing in itself, even if it doesn't feel like or look like relaxing.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Special interests are a topic I could go on and on about.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are you kind of like coping at the moment in terms of sort of daily life? Like, are you kind of like managing during the pandemic? Because I realize you're in Texas and I'm in the UK. So I just wondered how are you and how has it been there?
I think for me, the hardest thing about this pandemic has been that I'm grateful I was already working remotely before it started, so that wasn't new to me, and I was already adjusted to that,
Mm-hmm.
and that does suit me well. So that's fortunate because some people are actually struggling more working remotely. Even some autistic people are struggling more with the physical distancing because maybe services they depend on were cut. And I had a few things that went away and a few things that changed initially, but it's all of the rapid change that keeps happening. As an autistic person,
Mm.
I personally can struggle when I don't have a good idea of what tomorrow looks like, or I don't have a sense of security, or even with change, even if it's a good change, like and a change I want, it
Mm.
doesn't always necessarily make it easy for me to
Yeah.
go through a period of change. And so when COVID hit, it was like all of a sudden there was a lot of changes, with how you go to the grocery store and how you do, just basic things in your everyday life that you take for granted with changed. And then, a few months later, something else would change. And then a few months later, like, it's like right when you just get used to, quote, this new normal, whatever
Yeah.
that is, something else will change. And so I've had for the past, it's been like almost 6 months or over 6 months since this is all going on. It's like it's stretching on forever. Like there have
I
been so
know.
many rapid life changes. And that's been really difficult, specifically just not being able to settle in and know what the future looks like, know what normal looks like. I'm hoping now that I'm venturing off into working for myself after being laid off 3 weeks ago from my full-time job due to COVID, that I will have more control over myself now and over some of the things that would be changing in my life. And hopefully that'll make things easier for me, is having that extra bit of control where outside people aren't making as many changes for me. But all of that has really been difficult, despite the fact that working from home and not physically going places, that yes is a little bit easier, but it's like there's a give and take there. Nothing is perfect, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm totally with you on the whole change thing. I'm useless with change, whether it's tiny or more routine based and slightly bigger, and you don't know what your day is going to look like. I'm awful, even if I know change is coming. It's it's always been something that I have never been able to deal with particularly well. But I think we were saying like beforehand about you being saying that you were being laid off, and I just love how positive an outlook you have on this, and the fact that you'll be able to make these kind of decisions for yourself, and you'll be able to manage your own time more like effectively, and that you're going to be working for yourself essentially. And I think that's really exciting. And like you say, it's a big leap, but it's something that you're really passionate about. And I can just like tell that from the way you're talking about it. So I really think like you'll do fine. You'll do great. But I know what you mean about the whole kind of stability of having like a job. And I don't know, it's interesting to like hear from your perspective, how, you know, you suit working from home and it's how you work best. So yeah, I appreciate being able to like chat about it.
Oh yeah, and it's scary, right? It's scary, but I think, and I was saying earlier before we turned on the recording, I
Mhm.
thanked my previous boss, and we're all on very good terms now. There are no hard feelings at all. Like we're still going to be friends forever, you know. But I told her, "Thank you so much for ripping the Band-Aid off," because I probably, even though I think in my heart wanted more time to work on these issues, I was in that pattern of being afraid to take that first jump because it is so scary from having, you know, a stable paycheck you can count on to not knowing if you'll be able to make it or if it'll be okay or, you know, if you'll fall flat on your face.
Mhm.
But one thing in my life that I think has changed over the years is when I was very young, I didn't believe in myself at all. I had no belief that I could do anything. And I was really, my best friend who had known me since preschool, when I was diagnosed autistic as an adult, she was one of the people that said, "Oh, that makes complete sense. Everything makes sense now," because she had known me when I was really young. And then
Okay.
the next thing she said immediately was, "You know, when you were little, I remember you were someone who couldn't do anything. And now you can kind of do whatever you set your mind to." And I really think the difference is believing in myself and, you know, being willing to push when something is scary. Uh, and, you know, there's that nagging voice that makes you want to focus on what could go wrong and all the reasons you shouldn't do things.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, I hear those voices, but I'm going to force myself to pick out the things that could go right if I
Mhm.
just make the scary jump in that direction and hope it goes right. And sometimes it's just really scary to do that. And you know, when you have anxiety, you almost feel that constant nagging that so things are going to be bad, and just learning to turn that off and not listen to it and say, okay, I'm here with these thoughts, I hear them, but we're going to move forward anyway and
Yeah.
hope it's okay.
Just realizing that like your thoughts aren't always helpful and aren't always the truth. It's like it sounds like such a little thing, but it's so difficult to do is to get a kind of, I don't know, perspective on that, you know, these thoughts you're having, it's not you, it's your kind of brain churning through them and being just, you know, annoying generally. They're just intrusive thoughts. And like you say, you now believe in yourself and you've pushed past those, you know, annoying kind of voices or like self-doubt. And that's so interesting about what your friend was saying. Like she's obviously like seen you kind of sort of like blossom from where you were as a child, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, it's and that's why I'm so passionate about that crossroads that we find autistic people at, where it's like they're going to believe that they can do something or they're going to believe that they're broken. Because when I was really little, even though I didn't know I was autistic, I believed I was broken. And I don't believe that anymore. Um, and I wish more autistic people could have that.
Mhm. And just, you know, you've had to wait 29 years, I've had to wait 25 years to not feel different or, you know, a bit alien on this planet, you know, just to not realize that we're not broken. We were never broken. We just work differently and are wired slightly differently to everyone else. And it's annoying that it took however many years for us both to get to this, you know, discovery, but now we know it, we're embracing it more. I'm talking for both of us here. I don't know why, but yeah.
Yes. No, I agree. And, hopefully more people can experience it sooner, right? And they don't have to wait so long. That would be the goal, right? The end goal is that people don't have to wait so long to find out that there's nothing wrong with them.
Exactly. I mean, if we'd known just a little bit sooner, that would have been great. But that's not how life goes.
Nope. You just make the best of it.
Exactly. So we've been talking for over an hour now, which has gone ridiculously quickly. I think maybe if we sort of wrap up by kind of mentioning where people can find you online, and I don't know if you want to like talk about your Patreon and like bits and pieces like that. Up to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm pretty easy to track down. I'm on all social media channels. My website is neurodivergentrebel.com. And my Patreon is also Patreon/neurodivergentrebel. And I've got that actually set up as a pay what you can subscription. And that means from $1 a month to whatever you want to put in there. Everyone gets access to the same rewards regardless of subscription amount, because I don't want subscription to be, the fees to be something that prevents people from having the content. So I've got it set up super affordable, and I think it's as little as $12 a year if you want to subscribe on there. And those subscribers have access to sneak peeks of videos that are in progress and other little behind the scenes snippets here and there of projects I'm working on. And I'm really grateful for the Patreon supporters, because they're also helping me put out my first book, and I'm writing an autobiography, and I don't have an estimated date on when that will be complete yet, but Patreon supporters do kind of have some previews of that as well, and I'm working on that project.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I didn't know you're writing an autobiography. That's so exciting.
I'm trying to self-publish, so it's a bit of a big undertaking, but I've always kind of wanted to self-publish a book, and so I started writing it last year, and then kind of took a pause because this year has been, it's been 2020, and so I've been wanting to pick it back up, and just like we're saying, the universe sends you what you want. Now that this is my full-time focus, I can't see any excuse not to start back up.
No, definitely. Thank you so much for just coming on here and being really like honest and just genuine and so easy to chat to. And it's been, I don't know, it's been really a big thing for me to just be able to follow you along on your journey online. And I really appreciate you just being there and always being so supportive of me and my work as well. So I just want to say thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for the work you do. I think your podcast, and then also your artwork, is such a great way to contribute to, we're all on the same mission, right? To educate the world and make the world a bit better for autistic and neurodivergent people everywhere. And we all have different skills and abilities that we bring to the table to help with that. And so I love what you do as well. And I've been a huge fan of your work since I came across it. So it's great to finally connect with you and share some thoughts.
I know, and just put like a voice to a person on the internet.
Yeah.
It's always nice.
Yes.
Well, thank you again. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. So I think people will be listening to this in November. So probably end of November, this is coming out. So yeah, feel free to let us know what you thought of this episode. On social media and via messages, whatever you like. I always like to hear what people think. So yeah, thanks again so much for coming on. And see you in another podcast episode, everyone. Did you want to say bye, Christa?
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.